Thank you. Thank you very much. So my welcoming part is missing in this recording, but so again, I welcome everybody on behalf of the Commission and the OSOR team. Today's event is the fourth one in the series of webinars that focus on different aspects of public engagement with open source software. In the previous events, we discussed sustainability of open source communities operating within the public sector. We also had a closer look at the collaboration between public organizations and open source communities based on two specific cases in Hungary and Spain. 5 weeks ago, we talked about the process of adapting to the open source software development culture in public administrations. The presentations from all these webinars, and in some cases recordings, are available on OSOR. So if you couldn't participate, just go on osor.eu and you will find supporting materials, presentations, and recordings. Today we are gonna look at the process of building cross-administration collaboration or open source projects at the municipality level. We have invited two speakers who will tell us how things look like on the ground in the Netherlands and Denmark. So we have with us today Jacco Brouwer and Rasmus Frey. Jacco, Rasmus, could you please turn on your cameras because I can't see, and say hello to participants, so then your picture will display on the top, and everybody can put face to your names. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I'm here. Hi, I'm Rasmus.
Great.
And I look forward to sharing what we've learned in Denmark.
Great. And Jacco?
Yeah, same for me. Good morning, everybody. I'm still on vacation, so I'm quite in a relaxed mood, but I'd love to tell you about the experiences that we have done up so far in the Netherlands. So hopefully I'm visible.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I can't see Rasmus, but we'll manage.
Let me introduce you both now to our participants. Jacco is a community manager at the Association of Dutch Municipalities, which consists of all 348 municipalities and cities in the Netherlands. And in his work, Jacco focuses on scaling up collaborations on open source projects among those municipalities. And he will talk about the challenges the association faces in building and maintaining sustainable open source ecosystems, especially now at the beginning of this process. And he will show us examples of such ecosystems on the basis of 3 projects that he's involved in. Those projects involve several municipalities, and Jacco's mission is to scale up them to more municipalities. And Rasmus is the head of secretariat at OS2, an open source community that develops and governs ICT solutions for municipalities in Denmark. Currently, 70 municipalities out of 98 are members of the organization. However, it all started with informal collaboration of just 5 municipalities, and it was around 10 years ago. Rasmus will talk about the story of the OS2, the organization expansion, and how it was formalized. We will also hear about lessons learned from this journey and tips on what to avoid and what to think of when building sustainable collaboration on open source projects among public bodies. Jacco, Rasmus, we are delighted to have you with us today. Knowing your passion for knowledge sharing and the devotion to your mission to expand collaboration on open source, I am sure we will have a great talk today. Let me also introduce 2 other team members who will help us manage the webinar, Barbara Kuzma-Naite and Federico Chiarelli. And now we have time just a little bit to talk about OSOR itself for those that are with us today for the first time. And so next slide, please. So this is our very short and simple agenda. After a short introduction of OSOR, our guest speakers will tell their stories. After each presentation, you have a chance to ask questions, discuss, and after the second presentation of Rasmus, we hope to have a discussion more general, and also to hear about your experience when it comes to collaboration and practical tips on the developing ecosystems, open source ecosystems on the ground in municipalities at local level, cities, and so on. So Federico, could you please say a couple of words about OSOR?
Thanks a lot, Monica. Before starting, I just want to invite everyone to interact with us through the chat or by raising their hands. And I see that Joanna, you already raised your hand. I'm not sure whether it was an involuntary click at the beginning or you would like to share with us something before starting a short presentation on OSOR. Okay, so probably it was an involuntary click. So I started with a presentation of OSOR. What is that OSOR perform on a daily basis? So the observatory provides false expertise and information for public administration with a strong focus in Europe, but in general also beyond Europe. On one hand, we promote the adoption of open source within the European public administration. And on the other hand, we try to actively connect European public administration with different stakeholders. And we also provide them with useful resources that we'll be presenting in a few minutes, but also with regular news on the latest developments in the open source ecosystem in Europe, information on upcoming events that might be of interest for public administration, and also other resources. And lastly, the third pillar of our work is also to nurture an active community. So we do so by we are organizing events, as for instance this one, or by participating at events organized by other open source organizations throughout Europe. If you want to learn more, we warmly invite you to visit osor.eu, where you can find more resources and more information on our daily activities. But let's have a quick look on the key feature of can you just please go back to the previous slide? Perfect, thanks a lot. On the key feature of OSOR, so it's a knowledge center. Within the knowledge center, you can find a variety of different resources, starting with the open source country intelligence. We already compiled 27 reports on the different status of the member states, and more specifically, we collected information on open source policies and initiatives throughout the European member states. And this year we went beyond, also collecting information on other 16 countries throughout the world. Then we have, as additional resources, case studies. We have more than 100, I think 119 case studies, providing information on experiences of other public administration throughout Europe and beyond, where you can learn about their experiences, the best practice they put in place, the challenges they faced, and how they overcame those challenges. Additionally, you can also find a link to the latest open source strategy of the European Commission, and you can learn more about the key objectives and the concrete actions that are being putting in place. Another key resource is the guidance for sustainable open source communities in the public sectors, that basically provides you with a step-by-step solution and best practices to foster sustainability and success of open source projects within the public sector. Then we also created specific resources pages where basically we are collecting information on open source organizations, both private and public, and competence centers throughout Europe. So if by skimming the page, you will notice that there is some gap, please do not hesitate to come back to us and then flag this, and I will be more than happy to add it. And finally, we also have a dedicated page with repositories used by public administration where they can find already existing open source solution. But let's see what you can expect when landing on open source. On the screen, you will see the landing page, and on the left side, you can notice a menu that will give access you to different pages of the observatory. So the first one is access to our monthly newsletter, so all the previous edition, if you want to skim through them. Then we have the Knowledge Center that I just introduced, and then the latest addition that is the OSOR and community events, where we are basically collecting all the information from previous events. And in addition to, let's say, the list of events, you can find also the material that was shared for those events as presentation, recordings, key takeaways, and so on. As I mentioned before, our goal is also to nurture a community, so do not hesitate to become a member. And when becoming a member of the OSOR community, you will be able also to share your content on news, events, or information that you would like to share with the rest of the community. This is a brief introduction, but if you have any questions, do not hesitate to let us know. I will then hand over the microphone to Monica.
Thank you very much. So it's now time for Jacco to tell his story about how in the association that all municipalities in the Netherlands are members, they collaborate on open source and his work on scaling it up. So Jacco, the floor is yours. I just wanted to mention that we had a guest in one of the previous webinars in June, where Koos Steenbergen from the Netherlands Ministry of Interior of Kingdom Relations was talking about recent developments when it comes to work on open source policy issues, and how at the national level there is work done on advancing the use and development of open source in the Dutch government, and also about open source toolbox that was recently published by the ministry. So you are invited to look at the toolbox itself if you want to have more background information after our webinar, and to the presentation, of course, itself. And at the report on open source policy in the Netherlands that you can find in the Knowledge Center of OSOR. So Jacco, please, over to you.
Yep, that's great. I'm just going to be sharing my screen. And I have a few slides that will support the story of our experiences so far. Like Monica, the Netherlands, which is basically translated as open unless, and it's because we want to be clear on if we're spending public money, it should be providing public code as well. And what I'm trying to do is explain you something about the experiences that we have created so far about building sustainable ecosystems with the Dutch municipalities. It's going to take you through. Just give you some high-level context. Just like Monica just described, we have this open unless policy within the Netherlands. The link that you see here is also bringing you to the toolbox, etc. Also explaining the policy. In the Netherlands, we have local municipalities. We have 348, and they're all united in a thing that we call the Vereniging voor Nederlandse Gemeenten, which basically translates as the Association for Dutch Municipalities. Within the association, we're trying to do multiple things. Basically, translating policy into work that needs to be done within municipalities. And we also have, let's say, a part of the organization which is really focusing on collaboration. So all these 348 municipalities are basically doing the same things. So we would like to be able to do that in the same way, which is of course more efficient. What we see is that also on, let's say, IT, we're also trying to uniform the way that we're working. We have a thing in the Netherlands which we call common ground, which basically states high-level design principles and a shared vision on how IT should be organized within these 348 municipalities. Everyone is supporting that policy, but there's quite a huge gap between stating policy and actually doing it. So what we're trying to highlight today is the part of doing these collaborations around open source and how policy is supporting the way that we would like to work. Like Monica already said, I've picked out 3 examples on which we do public collaborations around open source. The first thing I could highlight every 3 of those, but I could, I don't know, talk an hour about every one of those. So I'm trying to keep it really low profile on these 3 initiatives. What we call in Dutch, it's already stated there, it's registratie vakantieverhuur. What it does, it's basically trying to regulate the way that we do Airbnb, etc. Because there's a lot of misuse of the opportunity to rent out your house for a vacational rental. So there's a law in the Netherlands which has been provided in which you need to like a specific unique number in order to be able to rent out your house for vacation. Because that law was stated, some of the larger cities in the Netherlands collaborated on creating what we call toeristische verhuur. And that's currently scaling from 5 to more Dutch cities. Then we have another initiative called OpenStad. It's been initiated within the city of Amsterdam. It's basically a platform in which you can do citizen collaboration on initiatives, voting. It's all about what we call inclusive. So we would like to involve everyone in deciding where money needs to be going to. They've open sourced it, so a lot of other cities are actually replicating it right now, and they're also trying to build sustainable ecosystem around this initiative. The last one is the one that I'm involved with quite closely, which is called Signalen, signals, and it's a tool that has been initiated within the city of Amsterdam for receiving nuisance reports. And we've been scaling that to currently 7 Dutch cities. I'll be using these examples in explaining the governance and all the, let's say, collaboration issues that we've encountered on actually scaling these from 1 to 2 to many. Basically, all the 3 initiatives and almost like every initiative that we have started within the Netherlands fit in this, let's say, abstract picture of an ecosystem. I'm going to run these through. So important to say is that the yellow parts are collaborations with third parties. So there could be market parties, there could be service providers, etc. I'm going to start in the bottom, which is cloud infrastructure. And this is also where the common ground principles come in handy, because what we're trying to do is to make sure that every municipality is working in the same way. And we have a project which is called Haven, and Haven is providing, let's say, a reference implementation for cloud infrastructure. So this could be Amazon infrastructure, it could be Azure, it could be Google, you could name anything. But if you use the, let's say, parameters that Haven states, then we all have the same foundation, which is really important. So this is what we state from a central point, the Haven infrastructure. We need third parties that could provide services on that infrastructure, because without service providers, it means that we have to do it ourselves. Most of the Dutch cities are following the policy on what we call software as a service or infrastructure as a service. So they would like to offload as much as possible to market parties. So what we've seen so far is that most of the cities that participate in one of the initiatives choose to have cloud infrastructure from the market and also have the service provider services which are provided on the infrastructure also from market parties. Of course, there's let's say the code library, the software that is involved. That's of course publicly available for everyone. And on the top level, you see, let's say, the left side, which is green, which basically presents the public involvement for the public parties around these open source initiatives. And we have the right side, which represent all the market parties. And basically, the top level functions as one. But I'll try to explain that to you. What we see in these initiatives, that it's really important that you have someone who is able to manage the collaboration, because if you start collaborating with several parties, it turns out that it's quite hard to actually work together on those initiatives. So what we've seen is that we need you could say, community manager, which is basically making the collaboration work. That involves product management, and product management just basically is stating a roadmap in which the product needs to be evolving. There's also a technical side to the collaboration, which involves code-based stewardship, some development, and that basically also is when you're initiating the project, you also have what we call the right to merge. I'll tell you something more about that, because that's something that we see shifting when initiative is started. It's also one of the issues that I will be highlighting later on in this presentation. On the right side, you see the market parties, which basically are an instrument of scaling in our case. So that means that we need third parties to actually start providing other municipalities in the Netherlands with their services. So they will be providing integration of the initiative within their existing IT environment. They will be supporting and helping organizations by implementing these services. They usually provide it as a service, and they could also fulfill a role in further development. And that's, like I said, for us, the market is a very important instrument on scaling initiatives to multiple cities in the Netherlands. If you look at the left side again, this is something that, in my opinion, should be managed by public organizations. This is why we do open source. This is why we stay in control and decide what direction we want to be heading to. What we also see is that some of the municipalities are really willing to collaborate, but it also means work, and work is quite difficult because it means that they don't have the capacity to fulfill that kind of work. So they need to be relying on what we call, or translate more or less into a function which we call an incubator. We need an entity that is able to help these initiatives to grow, scale, and become mature, and therefore also sustainable ecosystem. We from the Dutch Dutch Association of Municipalities, we've been supporting these initiatives, and we're also let's say, test driving the way that we want to be functioning as an incubator. If I take you to the next slide, I'll be zooming in a little bit more on the role that we have as an incubator. What you see is that we basically do 4 things. The first one is, of course, managing the collaboration. Like I said, community management is really important. Also setting out governance in the way that we want to be working together, making decisions on product. Therefore, we also maintain and manage the product roadmap. The product roadmap is, of course, how do you say that? It's managed by all of us, but you need a product owner which is able to make decisions, because making decisions with, let's say in theory, with 348 cities, that's quite difficult. So you need somebody who's able to either work with a group of people that is responsible for product management. And then there's also the scaling strategy. So the third-party collaborations in which we scale the initiative to multiple cities. To support that movement, communication and marketing is really important. So you need an entity that is able to promote the collaboration and the initiative. Like I said, it's there to support the scaling process. Then the technical side, it's about code-based stewardship. It's in this case, in the Netherlands, we like to value the common ground design principles. You could also say that we have the standard for public code, which the Foundation for Public Code is, of course, representing. It's more or less the same thing, I guess. And what we also need to be taken care of is to secure the long-term health of the code base. So reduce the amount of technical debt as much as possible. Really important, because without healthy code base, there's no how do you say that? It's really important within the ecosystem. And then something that is it sounds a bit boring, but it's really important, is the procurement and legal side of the collaboration. What we see is we have a quite strong interaction with third parties. That means that we need to procure work or resources. That's also one of the issues that I'll be highlighting in the next slide. For now, we have a way of work within the Netherlands which is doable, but it takes up a lot of time and a lot of effort. And we'll get into that later on. Financial control is also very important on the initiative, and also the legal compliancy, which basically states the compliancy, security, GDPR, pending hackers, etc. To make these collaborations successful, and in order to make money be able to flow, you need to be a legal entity, which is also important for the incubator. The incubator could fulfill that role, so all the Dutch municipalities can be united as one within, from a legal point of view. In order to make money flow, you need to be a legal entity. Now I would like to dive into the challenges that we have. What I've done is I made a few phases, so initiation, replication, building and maintaining, and which is more general is demand for new forms. And we'll be highlighting some of the challenges which we have encountered in building this incubator and ecosystems. First, on initiation, what we see in the Netherlands, we have quite a few municipalities, but only a few are able to actually initiate projects. We see two ways of initiation. The first one is the most common one. As Amsterdam, the city of Amsterdam is quite, I think it's one of the largest initiating organizations. What you see is that they have the capacity and also the financial resources to initiate projects. What they do is they encounter problems and they find solutions for it, and they build software with, of course, public money. So they publish their public code, and that's really nice. But just publishing your code is just not enough, because there's a huge gap between publishing code and replicating it. And what we see in Amsterdam is that when you start building solutions on open source, they really focus on building it mainly for use within Amsterdam. So if I take the Signalen example, Amsterdam has initiated that. It's been picked up by many cities, as in they were very enthusiastic about it. They wanted to be replicating it, but like I said, there was a huge gap between pinpointing them to the GitHub repository, as in, okay, the code is there, good luck, take it away. That was very difficult. So that's where also the Dutch Association of Municipalities stepped in, because there's a demand and there is a product, and we need to be bringing those two together. That's an important one. Like publishing the code, and what we see right now, it's getting better and better, is that we have, based on the standard for public code and also the common ground design principles, you see that initiating parties are actually, let's say, making code from start on in the right direction. So if you keep in mind that when you start a project and you want your code to be replicated, it needs to be replicatable from the beginning. And that's getting better. So, but really important. Oh, that's basically my third point. So the lack of high-level design principles is getting less, and that's good. Replication, that's also very interesting to highlight, because like I said, there are initiatives, and many cities in the Netherlands are interested in reusing those initiatives. But you see that we've been working in a way which is completely, let's say, how do you say that? Sorry, guys. We're used to define and procure. That's basically what the Dutch cities are used to. So you define what you want, you do a procurement, and you have a third party implementing it for you. Now the roles are completely different. If you want to be replicating one of the initiatives, you need to take initiative. You need to take, well, you need to organize it basically all on your own. And that's very difficult for these cities. So they need, and that's also where the incubator comes in, they need an organization which is able to help them out by actually replicating it. And that's where the Association of Dutch Municipalities is fulfilling a role. And we're also trying to teach and learn these local municipalities on how they should be able to replicate these initiatives. Building and maintaining sustainable ecosystems, we already kind of touched, but working together is really hard. It sounds stupid, but it really is, because these local municipalities are focusing on their daily work, and working together in a collaboration for open source is a whole new ballgame to them. So what we've done is we've created, let's say, an incubator team for those initiatives, and the incubator is their role in the beginning is quite heavy. So everyone is leaning on the incubator, and what we're trying to do is offloading as much as we can to the community itself. So eventually we need to be invisible, if you would like to say that. And then these the second bullet here, you need critical mass in order to build sustainable ecosystems. That's really the key issue that we've or the key challenge, if you like, that we've encountered so far. So, and this has to do with the way that we finance these initiatives. If we take the example of Signalen, the city of Amsterdam has invested, I think, over 800,000 euros in actually bringing the system live within Amsterdam. That's the first investment, which is fully taken care of by the city of Amsterdam. Then we had the city of 's-Hertogenbosch, the city of Almere, which they wanted to be replicating the initiative. What we've done is they brought in 25K each, and we made use of subsidies which are available in the Netherlands. So what we've basically done is we had, you could say, some capital, some start capital that we brought together, and we didn't have any expertise or knowledge on open source. So what we've done with the existing budgets is that we've been using that in order to bring in the right capacity. So front-end developers, back-end developers. And the first step that we've made was really reworking the code in order to make it usable for other cities. So that was our first step. The second step was to actually implement the system within the city of 's-Hertogenbosch. If you look at resourcing, that's also where our resourcing or funding came to an end. So you see that there's no long-term investment strategy behind the scaling of the initiatives. The initiative for Signale is the business case is right there. It's quite clear to see, but you need at least 30 to 40 cities to make that business case work. These 30 or 40 cities are all individually funded, so it's really hard to actually bring the investment that you need in order to come to that critical mass in order to build your sustainable ecosystem. It's kind of like we see with venture capitalists and startups. If the startup has a very good idea, it brings in seeds of money in order to grow and actually build a customer install base. The investment party is actually carrying the risk. They believe in the idea, they bring in the money to eventually, of course, make profit. Within public organizations, it's not that quite different. The only thing is that we're not there to make money. It's in order to, we need a party that is able to bring in the funds to reach critical mass in order to build sustainable ecosystems. And that's quite difficult because that means that well, I'm just going to make a jump to the last bullet here, because that means that we need new structures of investing, procurement, and risk control. Because now we're used to a completely different way of financing, let's say, the procurement of software instead of working together. I would like to also spend some time with the Q&A on this last matter, because for me it's quite difficult to explain, and maybe on the, let's say, the questions that are raised, I could be more specific on explaining what needs to be done. So I didn't keep track of time. Are we still good with the let's say 25 minutes?
Yeah, you were perfectly on time. So we were planning to finish at 47. It's 48. So thanks a lot for your presentation. And I think there was one point raised by Laura Garberti in the chat, and is also related to the expenditure. It's not as related to the funding as you were mentioning, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on what she was mentioning, because she says that one of the main obstacles in collaborating on the same project is exactly how to coordinate the expenditure of public money, avoiding forks. So I don't know if, Laura, you want to elaborate on that, or let Jacco respond to that statement.
I'm not sure do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot. Yeah. I thanks for the presentation, because I found it really interesting. I work for a consortium of which manage an informatics system of many Italian public administration, and in our small experience, the main problem is not to again to reach reuse of a project, but to build something like a steering committee, something who would manage the roadmap, the evolution of the same project, managing different expenditure, investment of different public administration. We want to be recognized their property on what they developed, and maintaining same project and the same code line.
Yeah.
Just because, beg your pardon, and I finished, expenditure of public money have to be abided of a lot of rules, which they have to respect, also building a coordination, some governance. The point of the governance usually is the most difficult to reach.
Yeah, and I think that it's also changing along the way. So in the beginning, if I use the example of Signale, we had quite a clear governance on how we would like to be moving forward. But now our collaboration is growing and expanding, and we get more and more participants. So then it's really difficult to, of course, democracy is really important when it comes to stating a roadmap, but it also makes it very difficult because there's a lot of time involved in actually making decisions. What we've seen, because the risk of, let's say, creating 348 forks on a code base, it's truly there. In the beginning, Amsterdam had made a solution which was really useful for the city of Amsterdam, but really not useful for other cities because of the way that the code base had been set up. In the beginning, we have seriously thought of creating a fork and make that fork, let's say, suitable for every community in the Netherlands. But luckily, and Stefan is also here in the call, he was one of the developers that started with Signale. The developers actually told me, we're not going to do that. We're going to be changing and doing pull requests on the existing code base. From my point of view, I figured that was going to be quite difficult because Amsterdam was already in production. So that means if we're going to be changing their code base, it's going to be a lot of debate on the proposed changes. In practice, it turned out that it was really easygoing. We're basically working as a single team, although we have two development entities, but basically they function as one. And we have a, let's say, product management team, which has a representative from every city. On what he's receiving from the product management team. So we have a product management team which deliberates on how the roadmap should be stated, but we need a product owner that makes decisions on what's going to be developed, yes or no. Does that answer your question, Laura,
yeah,
on the way that we organize that?
Yes, I think it's clear. You confirm that the difficult, but as far as understood, we have also tools to manage, and probably it will become more and more practical in different scenario. For example, in sometimes you can use just a maintainer because it's just a public administration who invests more than the others. In other scenario will be a foundation or something, a third entity to commit for the development, so on. So yeah, I think it's confirmed and it was satisfactory.
Yeah, thanks. And that's also the you see the need for that, as you described, the third entity, because for example, Amsterdam is still the initiator of the Signale code base. That means and like all the pull requests that are being done on that code base need to be reviewed and handled by the City of Amsterdam. The City of Amsterdam states that they also are not a service provider. So that means that they, let's say, the handling, the work that they have on these on pull requests, they want to be offloading that to a third party, preferably the Association of Dutch Municipalities.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Laura, for the question, and also Jacco for the answer. I see there are other few questions, so just to give time to every of them. So there is another question from Thomas, and it states, how do you manage the portfolio of available solutions projects that the other parties will be able to join?
Yeah, we have, like I said, the common ground, which is also, let's say, that's something that we state from the Foundation for Association for Dutch Municipalities. What we see is that we're trying to have like a, how do you call that in English? Basically an overview, so an online overview of all the initiatives that are available. You could say a toolbox, but I must be honest about it. I don't think what we see is that the interest from the municipalities is from a policy kind of. So there's policy makers or managers are responsible for the process. They are usually the ones that get somebody points out that the initiative is there, and then they reach out to us. So what we have done so far is more a technical library, if you would like to call that, with available components for reuse. I think it should be more like window dressing, in which we actually present the initiatives. If you go to signalen.org, that's what we're trying to do, as in presenting the initiative, or openstad.org is the same example. But I would like to see that we have a central, more centralized website in which we present these initiatives in an understandable way. So just to sum it up, we have some work to do there in actually presenting these initiatives, or that's also communication and marketing, as I highlighted within the role of the incubator. So yeah, we have some work to do there, in my opinion.
Perfect. So thanks a lot. I see one statement from Stefan mentioning that some software maintenance entity is needed. I don't know if behind that there is a question you would like to address, Stefan. Otherwise, we invite everyone to share their questions within the chat or take the mic.
Yeah, Stefan and I are working together at the Dutch Association of Municipalities. So it's good to see that Stefan is sharing my vision on what needs to be done. Indeed, software maintenance entity, you could say an incubator, but in my opinion, it's the necessary thing to actually create and build sustainable ecosystems within public organizations. If we're able to do so, then yeah, I think that we have a very successful way of working in the Netherlands so far. The question of Laura, we already
addressed. Yes.
But I have a question, Jacco, to you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. You mentioned incubator team within the association. So I understand that the work of this team is funded by the association, or you probably also doing it a kind of on the side of your other work. So since your mission is to scale up, of course, even if you, let's say, outsource a lot of work to third parties and so on, when it comes to governance and other aspects, there's a huge work, especially when more municipalities join. And even though you said that ideally the team, this incubator team, should become invisible with the time when the project is, taken by some municipalities, your role should phase out in a way. It's still, it will be growing. So you mentioned, talking about challenges, that you need some tools and investing, procurement and risk control. But what about really formalizing the work of this incubator team? You said website is there. Maybe the platform that really more collaborative spirit could show up, so more exchanges, so a platform as a tool. What are your plans for the future? Because like for you, sustainability is usually a problem for everybody in the case of such organizations.
Yeah, what we see right now is that you could say it's really project-based, what we're trying to do right now. So every initiative is trying to, or every initiative is encountering the same challenges, and every initiative is trying to solve those challenges in splendid isolation. And because I'm involved in a few of those initiatives, and my role has two sides. So first, actually scaling up the initiatives, but secondly, and I think in my opinion is that's more important, is actually bringing those shared challenges up to the next level. And that's where the Dutch Association of the Association for Dutch Municipalities now is trying to organize the incubator role that we encountered or that we experienced that is so important. So now we have the incubator role on a project base. In September, we're going to be trying to organize the funding in actually also the incubator, make it sustainable and available for all the initiatives that we start. I believe it should be set up in a decentralized way, because you don't want a single entity providing all these, let's say, community services for these initiatives. You would like to use the force of the crowd. And basically, it has similarities with the way that we've been organizing agile working or Scrum, etc. Because if you look at the capacity or the expertise that you need in order to organize a sustainable ecosystem for an initiative, you need a strong community manager, code-based stewardship. Those are the two most important roles, in my opinion. So if you will be able to organize education and making sure that we have capacity available that is able to fulfill those roles, then you can start working on decentralizing the sustainability of these collaborations instead of bringing everything to a central entity, because eventually you'll be too big, too large in order to be, let's say, agile. Because what we see within these collaboration is that if you're able to actually work on an agile way, then the initiative will be growing more efficiently.
So you see your role in a couple of years, not as incubator as such, but more as a guiding entity, let's say.
Yeah, I hope that we have several incubators which are able to, let's say, guide and bring these initiatives to a next level.
Thanks a lot. Do we have questions from the audience? You will still have a chance to come up with the questions and issues to discuss after Rasmus' presentation. So thank you very much, Jacco. Please stay with us, of course, so we can have a discussion later on. And now, Rasmus, please tell your story behind the growth of OS2.
Thank you. I will try to do my best. And first thing I'll do is share my screen. I hope everyone can hear me. And in a second, you should be able to see my screen. There we go. I hope it's working. I have no idea, but I'll continue. So, as introduced, my name is Rasmus, and I'm responsible for the Secretariat of OS2, which means that I'm the responsible person for the strategy and the operations of the association, and part of that is a responsibility for all the open source products or the public code bases that are placed in OS2 and the sub-communities that form around these. We need to make sure that they work according to the standards and principles that we've decided upon in OS2. Before I begin, I'll just explain the name, because it's probably a bit odd to at least non-Danish speakers. But it's basically a abbreviation in Danish. So it's OS in second, which means offentligt samarbejde, which is public collaboration, and of course open source. Then that's in place. I think my talk it might not give direct answers to everything Jacco just mentioned or that was discussed in the Q&A, but we've at least had some experience over the past 10 years in Denmark, and we've created a structure that works for us and in our context in Denmark. And I also think that it can work, or at least part of it can work in other countries. So I will go through what is OS2, why OS2 and why open source, and how have we organized things. And doing so, I will touch some of the challenges that Jacco just mentioned. OS2 was formed in 2012. At that time, it was 5 municipalities. It sprung out of the IT departments, so it's bottom up, and basically it's a bunch of like-minded enthusiasts that wanted to collaborate on a higher level. And the reason for that was that they already used the same open source platform to run all their homepages. So it kind of makes sense that they started collaborating across the municipalities. And they needed a place to do that. So they formed OS2 as an association, and very much an informal association. What happened is that things actually quickly evolved because in a short time of period, I think it ended up with 20 to 25 municipalities that started working together on this platform, which it was Drupal. Some of you might know that. And basically, the basic idea was that it's essential that we share the digital solutions because we are using taxpayers' money to buy these, and we need to get most value for those money. So there's no need to invent the deep plates again and again. And in Denmark, there's 98 municipalities. 12 years ago, we used to be 275, but we've cut that down to optimize things. So now we're 98. And essentially, it's the same business. It's the same task that they need to perform and fulfill, and therefore mostly the same business needs. So OS2 made sense that whenever there is a shared business need and the market does not provide a solution to that, or maybe the market provides a very poor solution, well, then we might need to develop something new. And in doing so, we must make sure that it's shareable, that the code base becomes public and for everyone to use. And that is basically the core foundation, the core principle of OS2, that whenever a few municipalities develop a new solution or have a new solution developed, it must be shareable. So the next ones that start using it, they can improve on it instead of developing it again. And in our belief, that's to the benefit of everyone, all 98 municipalities. Another important thing that we've learned is that for the municipalities, this comes down to the ownership of the code base of the solution that was created. We need to maintain control of the solution. We've paid for the code base to be developed, and we asked to have it handed over. We've open sourced it to make it public available. We need to maintain control. And for us, it's important because we need a great deal of influence. What is it that this solution is actually solving? It's us that know the needs the business have. And what we do is that we connect those with the development power and the knowledge that the private IT companies have. And then we have a perfect match to create a good solution, as long as it's open source. We need to protect the right to reuse things. It must be possible for us to have multiple vendors, multiple suppliers helping us to support the whole ecosystem. And as a public entity, we also have to buy things at the right price. We're using taxpayers' money. So we need to be able to expose these things to competition. It means we need to be able to ask the market at any given time, are we actually buying at the right price? Are we getting the right services for the right kind of money? So we can't have a vendor login on these solutions. And open source is just a great mean to achieve all this. So that's one of the reasons that everything that's placed in OS2 is released on an open source license. because we want to maintain control of the code bases that we create. It was also quickly realized, and Jacco have already mentioned all the challenges that you come across. We've definitely come across them as well, and still do. When taking the ownership, when asking for that, it also brings a great deal of responsibility. So if you have great power, well, it comes with great responsibility. We're responsible for the source code. We're responsible for the community that we build around it, or that at least we'd like to build around it. We're responsible for the quality of this, and we're responsible that other entities start to use it. So it's tasks that we haven't been used to perform in the municipalities. And that's also why we say that the quality of this product that we create is highly reflected by the community that we create around it afterwards. And just to turn back time a bit, because back in 2012, when OS2 began, it was very informal. It was basically things happening because passionate people wanted it to happen. But they also, in 2014, saw all these challenges and said to themselves, okay, we need to become more professional around this. We can't just sit down and agree all the time. So a more formal approach was taken, and one of the first things they did was introduce a membership fee. Up until then, it was all volunteer, but now members actually started paying an annual fee. Very little money, I think it was €1,000 to begin with, but that was what laid out the base to be able to hire the first full-time employee in 2016 and establish what we call the secretariat, which is now 3 people. And it resulted in work began defining how is it that OS2 is to be organized, how should we govern the solutions that are placed in OS2. I was the first employee in 2016, so I've been around for 5 years now, and through the whole journey of professionalizing the organization and the projects that are placed in it. We're still not there, but we've learned a lot. So OS2 is a classic association. There's a board, and that's elected by the members, and the board is responsible for the overall strategy of the association, and they have appointed the secretary function to run things. And me and my 2 colleagues, we are a support function. We maintain our governance model and the toolbox that we use. We communicate to our members, to our products, to other stakeholders, private IT companies, and the most important thing is that we help these products, all the open source products that are placed in OS2. We need to help them be sustainable. So a fundamental thing that we have experienced and that we've decided in our governance model is that we organize each product placed in OS2 with its own community. It's solutions that are used in different areas of the municipality. It's different people and different organizations. So we try to form a formal organization in each of these products. Each product must have a certain type of working groups, actual users that are responsible for which direction is this product taking, what functionality should we have in the future, what should be prioritized now and later. There must be someone there that secure financing, because once things are developed, you still need financing to maintain things. There must be someone there securing the right resources in the project. We need some project management, we need some community management, and of course we need to be able to handle the technical side of things. And we need to make sure that knowledge is actually shared within this little project. And in its essence, we try to create open source communities around each project, so it technically can break free and exist on its own. I don't think it's going to happen that projects are going to break free, but technically they could, at least some of them. So in this way of organizing, and when we dive into a project and OS2's governance model, with the time available today, I'm not able to go into details with everything, but and you're of course welcome to reach out if you're curious to hear more. But in an open source product and in an OS2 open source product, it's very important that we have 3 types of people or organizations present. We need some enthusiasts, someone that are willing to take a risk and be the first movers, willing to work extra hard to make things happen. Often this is one or more municipalities that take on that role, and of course they provide some manpower to fulfill the task. But for these enthusiasts, it's also very important that someone is actually interested. Someone else must be interested in the solution that they're creating, and potentially also becoming active part of the community, contributing to whatever happens around the development. So and then you could say that should be enough, but our goal is also that the solutions that the enthusiasts and the interested are creating should be used by more. So we also need to make sure that these people have the right tools to communicate and to tell the story. So all the curious observers, everyone that just goes on with life every day and do as I did yesterday, we need to be able to tell the story to them, so they hopefully will become interested and later on take part in this community. We also need to make sure that there is someone there to step in when someone leaves, because that is going to happen also. So that is one of the tasks that we have in OS2, is to make sure that this ecosystem is working. Another thing that the governance model we have is focused on is that all the projects, all the communities, working groups are able to utilize on the 4 freedoms in open source, because it's a fundamental thing, and it's fundamental to the success of the products that we create, that everyone has these freedoms to use, study, modify, and share the solution, but also that it's very transparent and easy to do. So we need to lower the barriers and make it as easy as possible for a public servant to actually utilize on the 4 freedoms in the project. And when doing so, and also because we are the public sector, we have some obligations. We need to help the communities we form. How do they actually comply with the rules and the standards that we have set up? What is it that they need to comply with, and how do they do it? It must be as easy as possible to do those things, or else people will jump ship because they have other things to attend to. It must also be very easy and very clear how you contribute into the project. What can you actually contribute with, and how do you do it? And in open source project, all contributions are good contributions. You don't have to write code. It must also be very clear how we release things and how it's done, because we don't want forks. Well, of course, a fork can also be a good thing, but in its essence, we try to maintain a single core code base. And if you improve on that code base, things should be released back. So we need someone gatekeeping things, and it must be very clear how this works in the project. As a public entity, we also need to be very clear on how things are procured. How do we actually ask the market to develop this software for us? Because there's not many of the Danish municipalities that have any developers themselves. We don't write any code. We buy that from someone else, and we need to be able to know how how should we ask for that service, and how do we make sure that when we ask for it, it complies with both existing laws but also the 4 freedoms in open source. In OS2, we've found out that often it comes down to starting in the right way, and we've created a little decision tree that a Danish municipality, they have to be able to answer yes to a few simple questions, and if they can answer yes to those, then it's okay to go and buy open source or go and buy source code and tell the supplier that it should be open source. That's a whole presentation by itself, so I won't go into details on that. The last part of the governance model is the requirements. We have decided to divide all products into 3 levels: level 1, 2, and 3. Where level 1 is where there's fewest requirements, and level 3 has the highest degree of requirements. Again, those are divided into 4 areas. The first one is the relevancy. How relevant is this project? First of all, it must create some local value, but there must also be the possibility that this local value has value in other municipalities. And the higher you go up the ladder, the more value should actually be created. In a level 3 project, there must be some kind of national relevancy for the solution. Then there's all the formal requirements. What about documentation, communications material, code standards, gatekeeping, and all that practical stuff that must be present in an open source project for anyone else to be able to understand it. On level 1, the idea is that it should be easy to step in, so there's a few requirements. But when we reach level 3, it's very important that we've actually tested the things, that things like handing it over to a different vendor has been tested. Is it even possible for someone else to grab the source code and continue development? The governance part, how are things governed? All the working groups, the steering committee, the project management, the technical side of things, and importantly, the financing. When moving into level 2 and level 3 in an OS2 project, there must be a formal agreement about the financing. And I will touch base on that in a second. And then the last thing is the strategic context. Is there anything in this project that ties into either a local strategy, a national strategy, or maybe on an international level, strategies and standards? Our governance model has a whole bunch of items that you need to be able to tick off for it to be of the right quality to be placed in OS2. So just to sum that up, what is it that must be present and that we are focused on securing in all projects we take in? First of all, there needs to be some kind of common goal across municipalities, a shared purpose, a shared business need. And there must be someone that are willing to be the first movers, that are willing to put in that extra effort to make it happen. There must also be someone that is actually interested in the result that we are going to create, or else maybe it doesn't make sense. And then we need a good framework to build upon, and that's what we maintain in OS2. We maintain the guides, the templates. We have the code of conduct that defines how is it that we work together. We have a model for creating the governance. We have written down some principles for code, for community. We have examples that you can use as a starting point. And we have a shared toolbox for the community, for how do they communicate, how do they project manage, how do they procure, and all those things. We use the same toolbox for all projects to keep it similar. And of course, we need to be able to tell the stories, communicate it, so other organizations will become interested. The financing of these things, for us, it's actually not rocket science, because what essentially happens is that if there's a few municipalities that has an idea, okay, we have this business need, we need it developed, we need 100,000 euros. And if there's 10 of them, then they each pay 10,000 euros for the solution, for have the solution created. So that's pretty simple. Then sometimes there's a big municipality and a smaller municipality, and then they agree that, okay, the bigger municipality might pay a larger share of that bill. That's essentially what happens most of the time. And that this is also to keep things apart. So we don't have, one project is financed by the municipalities that are actually active in that project. And the same happens in every project. So we don't have a central pool of money. Everyone is responsible for paying for the things themselves. Just like if you procured software in a normal way, you're also responsible for paying the supplier that you end up choosing. It's the same we do in the open source project. We just divide the bill between the participants. And then sometimes there's also a municipality that decide to develop it themselves and donate it afterwards. And then we have complications like Jacco also mentioned with the Signale, that this thing might be developed specifically for that municipality. And then the municipalities coming afterwards need to adjust it to their needs. But we still accept it and put it on level 1 in OS2. But most of the times we share the bill. This is today we are 70 municipalities out of the 98 that's a member of OS2, and their membership fee is financing.
Rasmus, apologies for interrupting. Just to flag that there are 5 minutes left, just to allow everyone to have time for the questions.
I'm aware, and I'm finished in a second. It doesn't mean that it's only 70 municipalities using the products in OS2. We actually know that 92 of the 98 municipalities in Denmark use at least one of the products in OS2, and that's fine because things are distributed. So a municipality doesn't have to be a member of OS2 to use a product. They can use one product, it's open source, and they can choose to pitch in that single product. And it's always been like that, and we're going to keep it like that because we believe that if the municipality or another public entity actively choose to be part of this, they also have a higher degree of commitment in it. And that's at least what we experience. We also know that more than 50% of our members are actually an active part of a community around the product. So the problem with initiating things is slowly disappearing for us because more and more municipalities have gained experience in this way of working, and they've had success doing so. So they will also do it again the next time. These are the 23 products that are in OS2 at the moment. I'm not going to dive into those because then I don't have time. So the next time you start out a new project, you could start off by considering what is the relevancy of this I'm creating. Should I share it? On what license? Who is it that will actually maintain control? Who will have the ownership? How will we co-create and how will we share knowledge? And it's also very important to at least give it a thought. Who is it that will take over when someone is going to leave the project? Because that's going to happen. Yeah, questions?
Thank you very much for sharing your insights and experience and the story about your journey for the informal small gathering, let's say, of enthusiasm to a well-established and successful organization that supports Danish municipalities when it comes to open source development, use, adoption, and so on. We have a couple of questions because I have also some questions myself, but I would like to first report on the question from Jacco. No wonder that at the stage of his work on the scaling up the collaboration on open source in the Netherlands, he's got a lot of questions to you. And I think that partially because you talk about financing of different aspects of the work of OS2, but there is one specific question: is the membership fee only used to provide the central OS2 services? Because you talk about how the projects and developments are financed individually by municipalities, but what the fees that they pay actually cover. And then I will ask Jacco to ask the other question himself.
So do you want me to answer that question first?
The first one, yes, please.
Okay. Yes, the membership fee is only to cover the expenses of the central OS2 services.
Okay.
Yeah,
and sometimes it's a pain, but most of the time it makes sense.
Yeah, and because it relates to my question, which is stated below, because when, like you said, the initiative themselves need to be, let's say, organizing and funding whatever is needed to scale up their project, right?
That's true. And the membership fee covers that we currently can have 3 employees in the secretariat. And we do provide some services to the projects because our responsibility is to help them grow. And in the beginning of a project, they need more help doing so.
Yep.
And then again, it might not completely true that we are only 3 people, because there's actually 7 other people working on a specific OS2 project.
Yeah.
But they are not financed by the central money. They're financed by that project's money.
Yeah, and I think that's the main challenge that we're encountering in the Netherlands, is that we see the amount of work that needs to be done in order to get an initiative to as much municipalities as possible. And there's a timeline involved. And for instance, and I'm just using a rough example, but let's say if you need a team which is actually maintaining and nurturing the initiative, and the team has a cost factor of, I don't know, a few €100,000 a year, you see that the municipalities are not willing to pay that kind of money. So you need an investor, if you like, which is able to carry the financial load in order to get to critical mass. How have you been organizing that around the initiatives in Denmark?
I think that, well, we experienced that as well, that some municipalities say, oh, this is not something we can cover in our budget. But in the end, when they find out that, okay, I still need this service that you created. So if I'm not going to go with the open source project and the collaboration, then I have to buy it somewhere else. And then they often find out that that's more expensive, much more expensive. And then they come back. But I also think that it helped us that we've in Denmark cut down the amount of municipalities from 275 to 98, which means it's larger organizations, which also means that they have a bigger budget. So tapping into a project like an OS2 project, where there is development costs and maintenance costs, and where everything suddenly becomes visible, it is actually easier for most of them. But then again, cities like Copenhagen, that is a very large city, and Aarhus, that is also a large city, they often pay a bigger part of the bill if they're part of the project, because that also makes sense that we look at, okay, how many citizens are actually in this municipality. So if it's 500,000 citizens, then they pay a larger bite of the
yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Does that answer it, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we should be zooming into in a different meeting, not this one. But yeah, thank you for your explanation.
We have some more questions and topics in the chat, and one of them is actually brought by Tony and then supported by others, about going with open source efforts to a higher international level. Tony, thank you very much for sharing several links showing such initiatives in Australia, India, and other countries. So I encourage participants to look at that. Tony, could you just say something more about your point?
Sure, yeah, happy to speak about that. So I'm involved in this kind of area for some time before my current role, which is within the Irish government. But the issue I've seen is that, as we all know, open source is on the rise and rising fast across the world, and particularly in the commercial sector, it's changing the nature of the software industry. We also know that governments and public bodies are slowly catching up, but we have a lot of catching up to do. And I think the two speakers have explained very well the challenges of trying to get public sector bodies that are often internally looking to try to actually collaborate across boundaries. I think the way to look at this is that everybody has talked about, avoiding silos and reusing or reinventing the wheel, I suppose, is the expression. And the thing to look for here, in my experience, is to look for common patterns that are seen across sectors, and those patterns are out there. It's just a question of recognizing them. And most people don't recognize the common patterns because they're focused on a physical problem that is here and now instead of looking for the underlying pattern. But there are common patterns and common components that are widely used and needed across the world in all sectors. And if I just explain the way we might go about this using something we're doing here in Ireland, I sent a link to a project called GovStack Global. They've done some analysis and they've identified about 25 levels of about 25 different kind of components. And there's only 25 that are really widely used across all of government. One of those is content management systems. And so if you take an example of content management systems, it makes no sense for any public sector body to be building, in my opinion at least, a new open source content management system, because there are already quite capable ones out there. And so what we're doing here is we're basically taking one of the leading open source content management systems that is already out there and widely used and seeing how we can use that ourselves here. Now that has its own challenges, but it basically means that if we make it work, we're lining up with an international community that are already actively involved in an open source product and project. If we can take that approach with our other requirements, looking for existing open source components that are already out there, then we don't have to try to foster the challenge of looking after our own open source components that or tools that have already been articulated, because those challenges are hard. But what we can do then is educate our colleagues in how to make the best use of open source components that are already out there and combine them and collaborate together. I think that shift in looking to more existing open source solutions that are already out there and collaborating on them internationally, not just at the EU level, but internationally, is the only way to scale this problem. I can't see how we can solve it at any other more local level, really. So it's a comment as well as happy to further discuss that point.
So also a suggestion. So Rasmus, do you have any experience in I mean, it's your organization is going in this direction, looking first internationally and proposing an existing open source reusable components to your members instead of going for procurement of new ones? Is it in your roadmap? What is the status now?
I completely agree. We have to go there, but we've also start off. What we've experienced here in Denmark is that organizations haven't been ready to ditch Microsoft Office and go with LibreOffice or something else, or ditch Windows and go with Linux. Well, of course, that's big changes, but you could go minor as well. But what I feel is that we are starting to get there, because now we've had 10 years of working around open source projects, at least here in Denmark. And a lot of these organizations have had experience, and they've seen the results. They've seen that it works. They've seen that they get more out of their money. They get more value out of their money. They get better solutions. They get a higher degree of influence. So I think it's also time also has to do its thing before we're ready to do this on a larger scale. So we need more organizations like OS2 in other countries, and I know they're there, with just different places. And yes, we have also started looking internationally. We communicate a great deal with the Foundation for Public Code in the Netherlands, because I think what they're doing is something that we actually need on an international level. Someone that is focused on helping. You could say that we need OS2s in every country, and then we need a foundation on top that is our organization that is helping us perform our thing locally. And then eventually we will start procuring for existing open source code bases. We are also doing it on a minor scale in Denmark, but time also has to do its thing. We need to change a lot of policymakers. We need to change their meaning and turn them around. But we've also looked a great deal at the public code YAML standard from Italy, and we're going to adopt that sooner or later to the code bases that we create here in Denmark, because it's also about creating. It must be possible to actually find these things, and we need an easy way of doing so we don't create something in Denmark that they already created in the Netherlands. So I also think that's a huge step for sharing code bases in the public sector, is that we all start, whenever we publish something, we attach this small metadata file, so it's actually possible to find it again in an open catalog. So it's a lot of bits that needs to connect for us to come where to the point that was Stephen, wasn't it? No, Tony. That you are talking about. But in Denmark, we've also recently started out together with the Association for Danish Municipalities and together with the Danish Ministry for Digital Solutions. So on state level, we've actually started working on a guide to the Danish public sector on how they can utilize on open source, how they can procure open source. So slowly getting there. But
Rasmus, we have already touched something that we call behavioral change. It's the way that we look at procuring software, in this case around open source. How do you manage to shifting that mindset within Denmark?
Well, we've always worked bottom up in Denmark. So OS2 started out with people that already were engaged in an open source project. They've we've just expanded from there. And yes, it's taken 10 years, but I think by doing so, it's been organic growth, and it's been organizations, and it's been real people that had real experience in doing so, instead of just some policy coming top down, where someone says, "Oh, now you need to do this because I say so."
Yeah. Because what I experience is avoiding risk, and if you start investing in an open source initiative, the outcome is still variable. So that means that there is some risk taking involved. And what I see is that we have some sort of allergic reaction to that, and trying to avoid as much risk as possible, which basically keeps hostage or takes the initiative hostage in order to expand and grow. So I think that's also a challenge that we need to encounter, as in how can we, let's say, take risk in a controlled way. I see that there's also like people are being scared of taking the risk because they might need to take responsible for it, or they held responsible for it. I think that we also should provide an environment or a structure in which people can actually take these risks instead of trying to avoid them.
Definitely, and I completely agree that and we've been fortunate in OS2 that there's been a few municipalities to start off with that was willing to take this risk themselves. They've also been able to do so because, well, they had people employed with a different skill set, but it was also relatively small projects, so it might not have been that huge a risk after all. But of course. And again, this is also about changing people's minds, and we've gotten to the point now that the next thing we need is probably policies also. So in Denmark now we need something coming from top down to support us working bottom up, and that could be a central pool of money that can help you. Okay, I can take this risk because. I can get some money here if everything fails. The most recent project in OS2 is actually financed by state money. And that's the first one that hasn't been financed by the municipalities itself. It's been financed by, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
cool.
So we are working on all playing fields.
Rasmus, Jacco, thank you very much. We still have some questions in the chat. I'm not sure that we have time to answer them all, but exchanges offline afterwards are possible. You both share your contact details, so I encourage participants to also contact you directly. There's, I think that you partially answered to Tony topic and issue that he raised about building blocks, because source code and source code stewardship, it's one thing, and focusing on it or using a common metadata standard like public code ILM or other, it's one thing, but he was pointing to the issue of using existing building blocks that focus on more business cases and so on, not only on the code. But I think this is a discussion for another time, for another webinar. But we had also some detailed question from Saranjit that was trying to get his voice heard. So Saranjit, just if you could, because you had a couple of questions, just choose one, the most important. Or maybe Saranjit, it's already not there because some participants had to leave earlier. Yes, I see. He said we talk later, so he's going to contact you probably. And it was about similar issue, I think, that Tony raised. It was he was asking about modular architecture to create solutions that are easy replicable, like, for example, handling language, local rules, regulations, etc. So do you have something like that in your offer? Sorry.
Yes, yes and no. It's part of our governance model that we tell the projects to start thinking more internationally when it's relevant. And there is at least one of the solutions I know they've tested in Sweden a few times. Well, of course, Swedish and Danish are very much alike, but still different. And we also have one of the larger solutions, an organization, IDM, Identity Management System, that is used by private companies now that are international. So they have English as their main corporate language. But to be honest, the focus of OS2 and the focus of municipalities have been, okay, we need to solve this on a national level in Denmark. We need to figure out how can we utilize the 4 freedoms of open source and get most value for the taxpayers' money. But now we have gotten to the point where, okay, now we need to think international. We need to make sure that we help each other across borders, which also means that the solutions that are currently placed in OS2, we need to look at them and see, okay, does it make sense to put some money in here to make it easier for a Dutch or Swedish or German municipality to use this solution. And to answer the question about architecture, modular architecture, well, some of the solutions in OS2 are actually infrastructure components or services that are used by multiple other solutions. So we have components that are already building blocks that are depending on other systems to function, or other systems are depending on them. But we've also, over time, it's very difficult because we have this what you call it, decentralized structure. Projects also have their own life, so sometimes we don't manage to get them to talk together and to be able to agree on a shared modular architecture. Then you need the projects to communicate across, and that's of course my responsibility, being the head of the secretariat, and it's something that we've put our attention to over the next years. We're going to put in a huge effort of making sure that projects don't reinvent the wheel if there's something we already have on the plate. Yeah, it's kind of a no answer, but yeah, we are very much aware that we need to think that way, and we want to solve it, but haven't done so yet.
Thank you very much for this answer and for all the information that you managed to provide today. And also thank you very much to Jacco. But I have one last question or request to both of you, starting with Jacco, but it will be the same for both of you. If you could give your 1-minute pitch to invite hesitant municipalities in your country or internationally in other countries to engage in collaboration, cross-administration collaboration on open source projects. Jacco?
Yep. Well, when I speak to municipalities, I always tell them you have to do what's best for your municipality. So open source on itself is not the goal. And because I see that most municipalities have, let's say, consumer behavior, they're actually searching and exploring market parties and open source solutions, and they try to compare those as well. It's very difficult to actually keep a pitch on selling open source to organizations. I don't think we should be selling open source. But what we see in the Netherlands is that many of these municipalities are willing to make a step forward. It's just that they're unaware with the situation. They're not experienced, so they need help. They need someone that will tell them, come on, take this journey with us. If we organize such an entity which is able to take them on the journey, I think that we will be accomplishing a lot of growth in a quite short period of time. And I think that would be my part of the pitch. Make sure that we have this entity which is willing to take the lead and have municipalities follow us on that journey. I'm going to leave it with that, actually.
Thank you very much, Jacco. And Rasmus, your turn.
Thank you. Well, it's a hard one, and I know you warned me ahead, but still, my pitch would vary depending on the municipality or the person that stand in front of me, because it's very different where these organizations are. Some have no experience at all and have all alarms going off when they hear the word open source. And other people have experience and are not afraid when someone says open source. So first of all, I would say that again, the same thing as Jacco actually. What you should look at your own organization, and then you should use whatever makes sense to that organization and its business needs. And then the least you can do is that once in a while you should ask yourself, if there is some solutions that other organizations have created or that we create ourselves. Well, first of all, that other people have created that makes sense to use in our organization. And secondly, if we create something, does it make sense for someone else to use it? Just ask yourself that question from time to time, every 3 months or something. And then whenever you have a challenge in your organization, then you should definitely consider that someone else is going to have that same challenge. And they can probably help you solve it. Maybe they already have solved it, and you just need to reach out. And working together with other organizations is also a great way of learning new things, getting better at doing your job, and also sharing your experience with others so they become better. And all these reasons is why you should become a member of OS2, because we have a platform for doing so. So you're not alone in this, and you have a place to actually reach out and a place to look at it when you have a challenge or when you want to become inspired or if you want to share knowledge. And then I would also say that the way we've structured things in OS2, the yearly membership fee for a Danish municipality is equivalent to 3,500 euros. So it's nothing, basically. And so in becoming a member, you could also just support the idea of this happening. And most people can agree on that. It's only very few that would say no to not sharing and collaborating. So, yeah.
Thank you. I know that there are still some municipalities that are not members of OS2, so if the representatives are here with us today, maybe it worked. Then in some time it would be nice to have actually possibility to hear about your international cooperation. When it comes to Jacco, thank you very much for sharing mainly your challenges at this stage. I hope that was useful for you and your colleague that joined us today to hear about some ways of doing it in Denmark, because of course there are many different ways of collaborating at this level. I mean, municipality, cities locally. Sometimes with a great support, sometimes with no support of the national government. But the most important thing is that this cooperation happens, and actually the challenges are usually the same. Financing, how to organize governance, how to make sure that communities that grow around open source solutions become independent if their initiation was with the help of an organization like the association in the Netherlands or OS2 in Denmark. So thank you very much for your participation and your contribution, and all participants for their questions and topics that they wanted to raise. We have just still some information about our upcoming publications and activities, because apart from the next webinar that we still don't announce the topic, but it will happen in autumn, so please stay tuned. But we want to share the information about our upcoming publications. Federico, please take over.
Thanks a lot, Monica. Indeed, summer is not over, but we are still working on the next publication. So what you can expect in the next weeks? So we will be publishing 8 new country reports. Those will be more focusing on an international context, since we already published the one on related to the European member states. Then we are finalizing a report on the role of open source during the COVID-19 crisis, and also there will be some information on the kind of solutions that were deployed and the best practices that supported the adoption of open source during the crisis. Then we also were working on the updated version of the guidelines on sustainable open source community that I was mentioning before. And finally, we will be publishing a case study on EMU. So to remain updated and receive notification when this publication will be online, please feel free to either subscribe to the OSOR newsletter or activate RSS feed on the website. In this way, you will be receiving notification as soon as these reports will be online. And before Monica was mentioning the next event, if you would like also to share your opinions on what should be the topic discussed during the next webinar, feel free to drop your suggestion here in the chat, or later on we'll be sharing also some email addresses where you can reach out to us. And again, on the webinars, if you are aware of any public administration that is involved in the open source ecosystem and you think it represents, let's say, a night of open source or an organization putting forward good practices, feel free to share their point of contact with us, and then we'll reach out to them. It's important for us to, let's say, design these events on your needs. So please feel free to share. And finally, I know we are a bit over time, but just a few of the channels that you can use to reach out to us. So as I mentioned before, you can become a member of the community or sign up to the OSOR newsletter, as well as to activate the RSS feed. But we are also active on Twitter, so feel free to follow us or engage with us through comments, resharing, or just direct messages. And finally, if you have any doubts, any queries, or anything you would like to share with us, feel free to reach out at the email address shown on the slide. So once again, I would like to thank our speakers and also all of you for being part of this event. Thanks a lot for the fruitful discussion and the insights shared so far.
Last additional information to what just Federico said about the case study that will be published still this week, I suppose. It's related to the topic that we discussed today, because it's about the way Belgian municipalities in the Walloon region cooperate on open source, and there is EMU is organization that actually deals with procurement of ICT, not always open source, but they developed together in EMU in collaboration with participating municipalities, several, or at least 10 open source solutions that are shared now by members of this organization. So another way of working together on open source. So please stay tuned and check our new case study that will be published soon. Once again, thank you very much for your participation, and see you at the next webinar in autumn. Have a nice afternoon.